PokerStatic.com. We bring you the interviews you want to hear. Now with your hosts, Bret Oliverio and Eric Bickel, the Poker Static Hot Seat.
What's up? Thanks for checking out the Poker Static Hot Seat. Bret Oliverio, Eric Bickel, and our guest tonight, he's a World Poker Tour champion, and of course I know him, or most of the world knows him, as the best heads-up sit-and-go player in the world. It's Olivier Busquet. Olivier, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, how you doing, guys? Thanks for having me.
You don't understand this. Let me just say this, Olivier. We've interviewed most all of them, most all of the great players in the world. He has been so excited to talk to you in particular.
I have been.
Because Bret fancies himself a young, up-and-coming heads-up specialist. I mean, he really wants to pick your brain today, so I'm just going to sit back and almost watch this interview. I can't wait to talk to you, too, but this guy is so excited.
Well, no, awesome. Here's how it started. You know, I started off playing, like, the $33 just regular turbo heads-up sit-and-goes, and I always saw this one guy who was sitting at, like, the $5,500 buy-in games, and I'm like, who is this dude? And you click on his name, it's livb112, and you're like, damn. Right. You know, like, this guy is just ready. And so you kind of look up to those guys, and you maybe watch a few of his matches, and that's exactly what I did. But I honestly didn't know what you look like, and I hadn't bothered to Google you, or I didn't even pay attention to the Borgata. It was Poker After Dark. And I'm like, wow, this is the dude I've been watching online. So, you know, it is pretty cool to talk to you. And we were talking off there about the heads-up super turbos. I guess let's jump into that first. Okay. Before we kind of get your poker story. I see you sitting down at some of those. And we were talking off there, and you said that, you know, you were kind of late to the super turbo party, but you are starting to realize that they are a pretty profitable game.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically right. At first, I wasn't really into the whole concept of Full Tilt introducing them. I just thought that they would kill some of the games that I was playing. And so I was actually trying to, like, tell the regulars not to play and to try to tell Full Tilt to take them away. I mean, I didn't really do anything like that, but I was just, you know, kind of late, like you said, just late to kind of accepting them and trying to try them out. And then when I tried them out, I wasn't really I was fine at them, but the fact that I was late, I started playing guys who had been playing them for longer, and they had just, you know, kind of tricks of the trade that I didn't really know, and I was making some theoretical mistakes that I wasn't realizing. And then I also realized that, you know, super turbos are just shortened mini regular heads-up sit-and-goes. So if you get better at super turbos, you're actually getting better at heads-up sit-and-goes as well, just the end game of heads-up sit-and-goes. Right. So I decided to try to play them, and then realized that, you know, I could basically, since sitting 5Ks and 2Ks and 1Ks, I would spend a lot of time waiting for games, not getting action, that I could kind of fill that downtime playing super turbos. And then almost 70 or 80% of my action started to become super turbos, not because I wasn't playing the other games, just because I wasn't getting sat in those other games as often. Right. So I would continue sitting while I was playing super turbos. And yeah, so I just started playing more and more and started to learn how to play.
Was some of your initial reluctance to play them just the notion that, hey, this is probably a game that might neutralize my skill advantage a little more because it's, you know, a little more variance and it's just a lot more shoving right away after one hand oftentimes? Is that why you were initially reluctant?
I think, yes, in this particular sense, in the sense that I thought my biggest advantage was my ability to beat regulars. Right. And I thought regulars would be able to neutralize my edge. I thought my edge against fish would be similar. Right. But my edge against regulars would be smaller. Right. Because certain intricacies were lost, and because I thought my particular edge had more to do with game dynamics than it did with math, and the super turbos are really almost exclusively math and very little game dynamics. And so that combination, I felt like, wow, all these guys who weren't going to move up to 1Ks and 2Ks because they didn't want to play me in the normal heads-up sit-and-goes, all these regulars who were kind of capped by that 500 level, all these guys are just going to be like, okay, well, he can't really create a big edge against me in the Super Turbo game, so I'm just going to play him and maybe multi-table, so play him and then play people at the same time, and just kind of the lobby, the lobby that I had kind of in my mind worked towards keeping open for myself. That whole dynamic would just kind of fall by the wayside. That's what I was afraid of a little bit.
Now, when the heads-up Super Turbos first were introduced, I believe there were 10 big blinds. So those were, I think, more just all in shove fest the first hand. But I believe, and people have definitely gotten better. But when I first started playing, I don't think people realized there was a little play to them. There was a little strategy. I mean, you're not shoving, Queen 7 offsuit your first hand when the blind structure changed a little bit.
And I agree, and I think also this is true in Super Turbos, though less so true. One key thing that I noticed is that what a lot of regulars do is that they have their strategy. They know what they want to do in so many different spots. But what that neglects adjusting strategies to the way different people play. So you might have a strategy that's people talk about hand ranges with 10 blinds, right? I could turn my hand face up and shove the same range, and you can't exploit it with a calling range. And that might be true, and so you're necessarily making positive EV plays. But what you're not doing is you're not, in theory, maximizing your potential, right? If certain opponents are making different types of mistakes, if they're calling too wide or calling too narrow, then you can exploit those ranges by adjusting your own ranges. So, just assuming that everyone has the best calling range, and therefore you just shove the same range no matter who you're playing, no matter what the situation is, that neglects the small edge that you can create by, adjusting your strategies for different people.
Gotcha.
Now, in my opinion, I was playing the $100, $200 games. I think players got better right around towards the end of last year. I mean, that just sort of jumped out at me. Maybe around September, October, November. No, I'm serious. I'm serious.
When coaching sites started to become more and more popular?
Yeah, well, no, what I'm saying is people quickly, I think there was a few months there where the games were super soft. And a lot of people, like we talked about off there, were martingaling. But then players started to realize, okay, you can make a significant amount of money playing these. And then, as usual, the sharks swarmed. I think the games are a little tougher now than even they were. I'm talking about the heads-up Super Turbos specifically than they were maybe 5-6 months ago. Would you agree with that?
I totally do. I totally agree with that. I think it's a combination of things. One is that, like any inefficient market, it just over time people realize where money can be made, and they just kind of close that gap. And then two, I wasn't really joking when I said about coaching sites. I think as instructional, the same kind of dynamic or similar dynamic, at least within Six Max Cash games, maybe a year and a half ago happened where, card runners and then card runner imitations started to spring up, and people started to get much better at cash games. People started to get much, as information is out there and becomes more, more available, and people have to do kind of less of their own discovery of strategies and can just kind of passively take them in, they'll much more easily, and many more people will achieve this kind of minimum level of competence. Now, I think that's not as true when it comes to higher level, higher stakes heads up sit and goes, and maybe also with cash games as well. I'm not sure. But I think what happens is people can reach a certain level just watching videos and taking lessons, but if they're not incorporating their own strategies and they're not thinking critically for themselves, it's harder for them to kind of move up even higher and start beating the highest stakes and the best players.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can argue that. There's no question that the training sites have had a massive impact on the game, certainly in the last year and a half, 2 years or so, maybe even longer. But my question is, have you noticed it affect your bottom line? I know for me, I noticed it. I know for Bret, he noticed it in the heads-up sit and goes. And me, just with playing the smaller stakes cash games, I just saw my win rate just go down to negative, and it was unbelievable.
Sure.
But somebody like you, who's the best in the world, did you notice a change in your bottom line?
Totally. I totally did. And if you look at my heads-up sit and go profit year by year, 2010 was by far my worst year. And I think there are a number of different reasons for that. But yeah, people just got better, and I think my edge decreased a little bit. Now, I think that what ended up, things work in steps. And so I think I responded to that by kind of upping my own game a little bit. Like, just as an example, I never used a HUD before.
Right.
I didn't even really know what a HUD was until like December of 2010. And then as I started to play Super Turbos more, I was like, oh, I really need a HUD now. Now I'm starting to, like, the HUD really makes a difference for Super Turbos. And so then I got one, and then I started using it, and I was like, wow, like, it's just so much easier now. I mean, now I know if someone's raising 55% of their blinds or if they're raising 65% of their blinds. And I can adjust my strategies in very subtle ways. And then it started affecting the normal heads-up sit-and-go play. Whereas, like, I remember I had a problem with a few particular players. And what I noticed was my problem with them was basically their strategy belied the impressions they created. They created these impressions, I don't know exactly how, maybe by timing and bet sizing and other things, of being really, really aggressive players. And then when I started to really look more closely at their actual numbers, I was like, these guys aren't actually that aggressive. They're really not, raising that often, 3-betting that often. They're not, that aggressive on the river. And I was like, wow, like, maybe I should start folding more. Just these like small little strategy things. And then I started doing that, and I was like, wow, this was much easier than I thought it would be. Basically the things that for me were a little bit less clear became more clear. And what ended up happening also, for me in particular, was that made me tilt less. And, as much as I'm known for being good at heads-up sit-and-goes, for a long time I've been known for being kind of a massive tilter and giving away a lot of money and kind of getting into it in chat with my opponents, which is really just taken away dramatically from my overall, poker. And when I started using the HUD, and it started allowing me to be more clear about the specific strategies I wanted to use, I was less clear about why I was losing in certain situations. And that lack of uncertainty made me tilt less. And so I think I've made dramatic improvements in tilting, and so my profitability now I think is even more than it was before. So, as people got better, I was forced to get better, and then that helped me, basically.
See, that doesn't make much sense to me because, as soon as I tweeted that I was going to interview you, somebody shot me a tweet and was like, oh, yeah, he tilts a lot. Someone said that, and it really doesn't make much sense to me because your results are by far and away better than anybody else's. And in any form of heads-up sit-and-goes, I think tilt control, bankroll management, I think those are the two biggest areas where people struggle. So how can you be a massive tilter but yet the best in the world and consistently playing the biggest games that are out there?
I think, I talked to someone a couple of years ago, and what they said in a very simple way was, imagine how well you would do or would have done if you just didn't tilt. And I think that there are a couple of things about that. One, my profitability, I've made a lot of money, a lot more money than other people have in heads-up sit-and-goes, but I've also played a ton of games. So a lot of that is volume-based. And also, I made a decent amount of money a few years ago where people weren't as good. So I could have this kind of takeaway of tilt from my overall edge and still manage to have a decent enough edge to win. And then, there's also this dynamic where heads-up sit-and-goes in particular, and I don't know if this is a function of the fact that they never increased the stakes in heads-up sit-and-goes as they did with cash games, but they were always seen as kind of limited profit potential. So the very, very talented poker people, the most talented poker people, would not go into heads-up sit-and-goes because they didn't think they could make a couple $1 million a year, and they really can't. I mean, nobody has ever done that before. So you see people like, Phil Galfond or Tom Dwan or some of the super high-level, very, very smart poker players, they're not playing heads-up sit-and-goes because they can't make that much money doing it. And so there was a little bit of a talent cap in heads-up sit-and-goes that I was able to take advantage of. And, I think that's just a kind of a basic reality.
Go ahead, Bret. I was just going to say, why have you not made that transition, though, over then to heads-up cash games? I mean, you've dominated. You've shown clearly you're the best in the world. Why not go for that $2, $3, $4 million a year?
Well, for a couple reasons. One was tilting. I used to tilt when I would play in cash games, and that would crush me. Like, tilting in cash games, especially because I hadn't had much experience, and so I didn't really have that much of an edge. Like cash games, there are a bunch of different dynamics that came into play. One was that I would play them when I didn't want to play heads up, sit and go. So when I was either tilting or bored. And the dynamic in cash games was that, and it still is obviously, that, tons of regulars wait. So I would wait for a few minutes, and I would get bored. I don't want to wait anymore. So I would try and start sitting the guys who were waiting. Most of them wouldn't want to play me because they're bum hunting or waiting, and then some would. But the people who would play me were all the really good players who were willing to kind of really play players. So I ended up game selecting in reverse by playing all the good players, and then I would either get bored or I was already tilting, and then I would play badly, and then I would lose. And so I didn't think I could really make that much money. I didn't think, oh, wow, I made, I can make $500,000 a year playing heads up, sit and goes. I could probably make $2 or $3 million playing cash games. I thought, wow, if I just play cash games, maybe I won't even win, or maybe I'll only win a certain amount of money. That was one. Two, I made, my experience, my kind of journey through poker, and we can get into this more, was in some, started in some ways in a pretty negative way. I was really consumed by poker at first, and sorry, just give me 1 second. And
no problem. I like it.
And it was kind of, I think poker.
I was going to say, I like it. Is the other screen lighting your face up? It looks better. So I like it that you have the other screen on.
Okay, yeah, no, it's basically, it's on a screensaver, so every once in a while it will turn dim, but I'll keep it bright.
Yeah.
So basically, I made I don't want to say a pledge, but I guess a kind of commitment to have poker be less a part of my life rather than more, because I was playing so much. So as I was trying to make poker less a part of my life, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to learn something new. That was another reason I never really started playing PLO like a lot of people did. Because I don't want to commit so much time now to learning a new game to become profitable. I want to really maximize my edge, play the game where my edge is already the highest. And so that was always heads up, sit and goes. And I also liked the fact that I was, that I had developed this niche and that I didn't have to kind of carve out a new niche for myself. I had this niche, and when I thought about trying to make more money playing poker, what I ended up doing was starting to play live tournaments. And that ended up working out pretty well for me so far. So that's basically how I dealt with that.
Well, let's start even before that, because you didn't start playing poker till you were 25, I believe.
Right.
And you're
that's
different
any form of poker.
Yes, that's so much different than a lot of these players we talk to. And not just that, it's you come from an athletic background. I guess you were a pretty sick high school basketball player. You went on to college, Cornell, I believe. You graduated, got a regular job, and then you discovered poker. So why don't you just talk about sort of growing up and then finding the game of poker?
Yeah, well, I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan. I went to private school in New York City, and I went to a school called Trinity High School, which was actually recently named the #1 high school in the country. And that's from the point of view of sending kids to college. 50% of the graduating class went to an Ivy League school, which is, that's a crazy number.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was kind of a specific upbringing, and both my parents were. My father's in banking. My mother was a high-level executive at a couple different corporations. And I was around a lot of other kids from the same kind of socioeconomic background in school. And that led me on a kind of particular path of going to college, having a leg up in terms of being able to get into a really good school. And then from there, kind of pursuing essentially a few different narrow paths, like lawyer. I didn't really want to be a doctor, kind of investment banker type, a Wall Street type. There weren't that many different things that a lot of my friends or people that I knew were doing. I always wanted to be a trader on Wall Street. I was told by my father and by some people that knew me that my disposition, my skill set was really good for that. That, there was, you get told that you can make it, people make tons of money doing it. So I was always enamored with that idea, and so I originally wanted to be a trader. Then I was told that, and from an athletic point of view, I played a lot of basketball. My actually best sport by far was track. I used to run the 800 and the mile, and I was really, really good at that. And then I broke my leg playing soccer, and then I didn't run anymore. But so when I tried to get a couple jobs trading, I was actually working at a very highly respected hedge fund in Stamford, Connecticut, and I was commuting back and forth from Manhattan. and I was trying to get into to a trading position, but at the time I was in a support function. And I was told that poker and trading had a lot of skill set overlap. A lot of the guys did both, played poker and traded, and a lot of what it took to be good at one, also you had to be, you used to be good at the other. So I was like, all right, well, while I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to be good at trading and while I'm trying to get a good trading spot, why don't I try to play poker, learn how to play, see if I can be good at it. And that's how basically playing poker started for me. I had actually a couple friends from middle school and high school who were trading already, and they invited me to a poker game, and I played poker with them, and that's how I first was introduced to the game, literally. And then I started playing online, and then kind of got more and more into it, and then started playing exclusively poker.
And you started out, you were playing cash games, I believe. I read another interview where you said you were playing 6-max cash games, and actually, fairly early on, ran it up to a couple G's, and then jumped into the 5-10 game, and like in one of your first months, ran it up to 100K? Is that accurate?
Well, I actually, I don't know if it was one of my first months. I actually took a couple, I went broke a bunch of times, and by broke I mean online broke, a bunch of times at 510, who doesn't go broke at 510 when you have 3 or 4K, right? Right. So I would run it up a little bit and go down, but I was living at home, so my expenses were low, and I had a job that paid a decent amount at this hedge fund, so I could kind of replenish my account every once in a while whenever I felt like it. And this was when poker was starting to become bigger and bigger in my mind and in my life. And then I just went on one of these runs. This was kind of at the same time that I was improving, that I was starting to think about poker theory in a way that was different from, trying to kind of analyze what I was doing, how I would get better, trying to study the game more than just play for fun. And all of these things coincided with, a very good kind of variance run. And then, I ran it up. And I ran it up as I was moving up. So, I ran up to 20K. It was like, oh, well, now I'm rolled for 2K, for 1020, right? And I was like, oh, I have 50K. Now I can play 2550, right? I mean, kind of just these ridiculous bankroll considerations at the time because I just didn't know better. And then, I ran it up to just over 100K. And that last run from being broke to 100K took about a month.
Wow.
Wow. So then when did you make the transition to sit and goes?
Well, I tell a story where I went out with some friends to celebrate breaking 100K in my cashier. I come home really wasted. I didn't remember what happened. I woke up and I had 20K less in my cashier. And I was like, what just happened? And I proceeded to break down, tilt, and lose the entire 100K. And it was so brutal for me. I reacted really, really poorly to that. And one thing I realized, and not just then, but throughout the course of my poker career, was that I did have some natural skill sets that were great for poker, but they were great from the strategic point of view of poker. From the emotional point of view of poker, I was actually think that I was not a good fit at all. You see some people who are just I don't know if you want to say less emotional or more, I don't really know how exactly to explain it, but I was much more vulnerable to the emotional swings of variance than I think some other people are. And it just hit me really hard. And I reacted really poorly to it.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Having met a lot of the people that have been super, super successful, particularly the online guys, a lot of them there is some sort of emotional detachment that they have. And it's just, it may not work for them in another aspect of society, but actually in poker, it works out brilliantly for them. It's really amazing.
And I've heard the same thing is true of traders.
Right.
I don't know if that's really true, but I've heard that similar things are true of traders. And it's kind of disassociation with money as well. People talk about, Phil Ivey and how he just can lose an enormous amount of money and doesn't care. Yeah. And, now Phil Ivey has so much money that it really doesn't affect him. But there was a time where I think financially it would affect him, and he really just didn't seem to care that much.
It's also,
and I did,
There's also, I think, a generational thing with some of these younger kids, too, where it is like a video game to them in a lot of ways, and it's just running up a score, and that's a little different.
Yeah, and the thing also is maybe the fact that some of these kids were doing, I have a lot of friends who are much younger than me, and maybe some of the fact that some of these kids were running up their bankrolls at 18 or at 20 is different from doing it at 25. Right. I don't know how different that is, but regardless of that, I just knew that for me, I started to realize that for me, I just had to either stop doing this or start to develop a little bit more resilience in that way. And over time that happened, but it was a tough process. It didn't come naturally. It didn't come easily. But I mean, over time it happened. You know, I went on a downswing 3 days in the last 3 days where I lost 50K, and it's not really a blip for me.
Right.
But that took a lot of time to get to that point.
How did you improve, though? I mean, obviously you had a skill set, or maybe not emotionally.
From a strategic point of view.
Yes. Were you reading books? Were you a member of the training sites? Did you have guys that you were exchanging information on 2+2 with? How did that work?
Well, this was kind of before training sites, so I didn't know of any training sites. I don't think they really existed, but there was one particular way that I learned, and that was from reading 2+2. I didn't contribute to 2+2. I wasn't an active member posting stuff, but I would read it. And while I was working at this firm, you know, I commuted an hour each way, and then my job itself was not that taxing. It wasn't that time consuming, so I had some free time during the day, and I would just read for like 6 months. I read every single post that was posted on the high stakes no limit forum on 2+2. And I don't look at that forum anymore. But 4 or 5 years ago, when I was learning, that was what created the kind of foundation, the theoretical foundation. Just understanding how smart players think about hands.
Right.
You know, what are their considerations? You know, like just the concept of ranges, I had never thought about. I didn't even know what it meant and how it applied into poker theory. Now it's the only thing that I think about. You know, I don't even think really that much about individual hands. In live poker, it's a little different, but at least when I'm playing online. So yeah, 2+2 was really how I learned. Yeah, and I did talk a little bit with people. I was friends with this guy Dustin Dirksen, who made a big splash on Full Tilt a few years ago and has done well in tournaments kind of here and there throughout the last few years. And he, one of the things that I realized about him when he first came onto Full Tilt was he played differently from most people. You know, there's always this kind of conventional wisdom, this kind of wave of what good players are doing. And then there are some kind of out-of-the-box thinkers who try new things, come up with new strategies, and he was one of those guys. And I remember for some reason, I remember one post that a really well-respected player posted. He didn't say anything about it. He just posted the hand. And the hand was like Dustin, I think, had called a raise with like ace-4 suited, and the flop came like 3-5-7 with one of his suits. And he led into the razor and then jammed over a raise. And the guy ended up calling with queens, and then he hit and won. And some guy responded like to the post like, well, I don't think it doesn't seem like that's such a bad play. And the original poster was, yeah, I didn't post it because I think it was a bad play. I posted it because I thought it was a good play. And he has, this over and 2 gutters and a backdoor flush draw, and people just weren't doing, people very rarely lead out of position into the razor, and people, that type of play now is just, you would see it more often. It's not that crazy of a play, but at the time it was just an example of just a different line that most people weren't taking. And when you take lines that are different from how most people take, what I think you end up doing is you end up taking away the vast majority of their experience. If someone has played 2 million hands, but 1.9 million of them have been, someone raises pre-flop, someone calls pre-flop, and then checks to the razor. If you now break that line somehow, and now you lead into the razor, now 1.9 million out of 2 million hands they've played, they don't become irrelevant, but they become much less relevant. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So taking
totally.
different lines, being creative in the way that you approach situations, that was one example that led me to try to develop some of my own strategies.
Now, a few minutes ago, you said that when you were running bad and you sort of went through that 100K that you ran up, you reacted poorly. What does that mean? Did you go into a depression? Did you start drinking every day? I mean, what exactly does reacting poorly mean for you?
Well, I didn't start drinking every day. But yeah, I did, I guess, go into a sort of funk. And it lasted a while. I would from a personal point of view, I was just not as happy. I didn't smile as much. I didn't enjoy my life. One of these basic things, but I just was kind of in a funk. In a daze, I would kind of stare out of the window and not be as interested in other things or other people, or I just wasn't as engaged in life. I was just kind of depressed about it. And that kind of experience for me was, it accompanied my poker life for a while. Even after I recovered from that, even after I started being consistently successful in heads up sit and goes, the connection between my own sense of self-worth and my short-term poker results was way, way, way too close. And my overall happiness would be determined by how I was running. And that is a really awful way to live your life. And it's a very tough kind of negative cycle to break. And that would kind of happen, that's when people talk about tilt. For me, that's one of the things that would happen is that I would, get unlucky and lose. Then that would make me feel shitty, and then, excuse my language, and then feeling bad would make me play bad too. And then that would just kind of, turn on itself and just create these, really bad situations. And it took me a while to kind of break that.
See, I know exactly what you're talking about. Just because, I think a lot of people have. I mean, I have a lot of that in me, just hearing exactly what you're saying. Did you ever go through, like, epiphany mode where, you play well for a week or so, then you have an awful session and tilt away a ton of money, and then you wake up or you go to sleep and you're like, I got to do something different with my life. You totally just go through these epiphany, you know what I mean? You start thinking, like, I got to do something totally different. Was that part of of your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always considered myself someone that learns lessons the hard way, but like once I learn them well. And this type of progression, this evolution for me was like a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. I would get into these moments where I'm like, wow, I fixed it. I solved it. I'm never going to tilt again. And then eventually I would just kind of, I don't want to say relapse, but I would get, I would come back into that cycle. And yeah, there were times where, I was like, yes, what am I doing right now? Like, from a big kind of point of view, like, is this really worth it? Does this make a lot of sense? But I always had this in the back of my mind, or in the back of, deep in my heart, I always felt I can make this positive. I know that I can turn this into a positive experience, dynamic kind of thing in my life. I just am not exactly sure how yet. And the reason that I knew that, I think, was because I had glimpses of it. I could see it, and I just had to try to extend that out. And so, everybody knows from like a rational point of view, hey, you're going to lose. Variance is going to hit. Sometimes it's going to be crazier than you expect or that you ever think possible, and you have to be able to anticipate that. It's just, there's this disconnect, at least for me there was, between the rational part of my brain that understood this was supposed to happen, that this had to happen, and the emotional part of my brain that didn't want to accept it. And I just, I've been thinking how to describe the process by which I was able to evolve into turning that cycle on its head and making it positive. It's hard for me to exactly explain what happened, but it was a progression. It was an evolution. A lot of it I credit my fiance, who is, besides being someone that I obviously love very much, is probably the best person, objectively speaking, that I know. And learning from her example of how to kind of organize my life in a way that was closer to the way I wanted it to be was just really good for me. Achieving a balance in my life between other interests and other activities. Seeing poker, this was a big thing for me, was starting to internalize the fact that poker was a means and not an end, or that poker profit was a means and not an end. That it was not, that was not my end goal. It wasn't like, once I've made money from poker, now I'm happy or successful or content with whatever I've done. But it's that now maybe I can provide a higher standard of living for my kids or stepkids that I have now, that I can travel and see things, that I can live more comfortably, that I can take some time to do other things that I'm interested in that I think are worth pursuing. It was for me when I didn't have a further extension of my goals than just making money from poker that I was too wrapped up in that cycle, I think.
You know what's amazing?
And now,
I'm sorry, Bret. What's amazing to me is, and it just keeps coming through in my head, listening to Olivier's background, right? He goes to this amazing school. He's got these incredibly accomplished parents. I believe he even told a story in some interview where when he first started really killing it, he was still the 4th lowest earner in his family, something like that. I mean, his family is really doing well. How did you get so great? You must have amazing parents. You must have a great family, because if I was you, I would have turned into the male Paris Hilton. I'd be doing blow. I'd be in a porno. I would, be partying my ass off, and yet you seem grounded, driven, You got presumably a beautiful fiance, great family. How did this happen? How did you stay grounded amidst all of this success that you sort of surrounded yourself with?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One, I think I was rather fortunate to find poker later in life. So if I had found poker when I was 20, I was probably partying too much when I was 20, to be honest.
Right.
Like way too much. And I was focused on kind of that more the shallow aspects of I guess life. And if I had found poker then, I don't know what exactly my reaction or response would have been. I don't think I would have dropped out of school. I've always been just very, very, very a firm believer in the importance of schooling. But I think a lot of that comes from my family. You know, my parents are also French, and they immigrated here from France, and that cultural difference, I think, played a role. They both personally influenced me in ways to just, I guess, stay grounded and stay prioritized, basically. And and also balanced. I mean, balance. I always, even if I wasn't balanced for a while in my life, I always knew that balance was an important value to have. So, I don't know. I think it's a combination of things. But, I talk to kids all the time, constantly, who are weighing the decision about whether to go to school or not, to go to, to go to college or to finish college, when, they could just, make millions playing poker in theory. And, the reality is, it's kind of like professional sports where, everybody thinks they're going to grow up and be a superstar and make millions of dollars. But the reality is only very few people will. And on top of that, poker is actually the kind of thing where you can do in addition to going to school, which I think is so great. And for many people where schooling becomes such an expensive proposition, if you can make some extra money playing poker, that can really alleviate that situation. So, I think I was a little bit lucky to be grounded from an educational, foundational point of view, and then to have found poker a little bit later in my maturity or development.
Now, a few minutes ago, we were talking about tilt, and in a situation where this was put to the test big time was Poker After Dark. I mean, here you have, which has been, I guess, I watched it when it first aired, and I think it just aired again.
Yeah.
Phil Locke is hammered.
Right.
And I've never seen him play like, he usually plays like sort of a nit on TV. He's out of control.
Totally.
Viffer's playing like Viffer. There's seemingly so much money to be won. You're playing a cash game, and yet it was just beat after cooler, and you kept your composure. You played well. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
Well, Poker After Dark was a great experience in the sense that because almost all of my online plays and heads up sit and goes, which is kind of a small niche, not that many people know or knew who I was. And so Poker After Dark kind of expanded my exposure to more general poker fans than kind of specific online people. So that was great for me from that point of view. And that was one of the big reasons that I wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. I mean, I really have very little cash game experience and none at those stakes. I felt a little bit fortunate to get that lineup. I mean, my lineup could have been, Duran, Antonius, and Ivy, and it wasn't.
Right.
So I was felt fortunate to get that lineup. From a tilting point of view, I actually never really had tilting issues with live poker. I'm not exactly sure why. I think I always considered live poker something on the side. You know what I mean? Something just not my main thing. So if I lost, it wasn't really that big of a deal because that's not really what I do. And then also just the human element of it, being able to see someone, look at them in the eye, feel their energy, if that makes sense, just have that personal experience with people, I think in some ways made me more self-conscious and so less likely to embarrass myself by tilting, but also it just gave me a more kind of holistic experience and wasn't as much like I'm in a room, the same room I've been in for 10 hours or 30 hours. I'm by myself. It's dark. I haven't eaten and I haven't slept and I'm losing money. That was more the type of tilting experience that I was in. So I wasn't something so much that I was afraid I was going to tilt, at least not in the same way that I would do online. But yeah, I mean, it was rough to deal with the variance, especially because it's one of those situations that's not going to repeat itself that, often enough for variance to really balance out. So, and some people talk about this with kind of live tournament final tables. You know what I mean? Like the guys who run that at the final table of the World Series of Poker main event, like they're not going to get in those spots again to like win the races that they lost and recoup that $6 million in EV that they lost. So that's just a part of poker that you just have to accept, I think. For me, it wasn't that difficult to accept. Like when I got, home the next night and I'm like, wow, I just lost a lot of money and I lost on, national TV. Like that's not great. You just have to kind of just grin and bear and just deal with it.
How'd you get on the show?
How did I get on the show?
Because you're an online player.
Yep.
You're an online player who really doesn't have much TV experience. I mean, obviously you
just
held
won
your
from that WPT.
No, that's true. That's true. But how, we hadn't seen you in a Poker After Dark or a show like or High Stakes Poker. How'd you make your way on there? Do you have an assistant that got you the spot, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of two things. So first of all, I think Poker After Dark, the show itself, was making an effort to branch out and to give people who hadn't had a chance a little bit more of a chance. So that was one thing. And the second thing was basically I have a manager. Is a guy that I've actually been best friends with since high school. He went to the same high school that I did. Grew up 2 or 3 blocks away from me, and he actually doesn't have any poker managing experience. He used to have a record label, and then now he manages DJs and hip hop artists. And him and I started talking maybe a year ago almost, and we decided that we could collaborate and it would be beneficial for both of us. And he's just been awesome. I mean, he's worked really hard, created and maintained relationships, and he actually had a personal relationship with someone that worked on the show, leveraged that, and I ended up getting a spot. Basically the same kind of story that happened for the NBC Heads Up.
I want to touch on your WPT win, though, at Borgata, because I found that fascinating. And, I wasn't as familiar, I'll be honest with you, with your work at the time. Bret, of course, was the Heads Up Sit and Go King, so he knew all about you. But when I saw a recap of that recently, I thought it was hysterical. I didn't realize that when it got to a heads-up situation, the other guy apparently was just tanked. Now, you're the best player in the world, but he had a 20-1 or whatever chip lead on you, and he kept ordering drinks. And I just found this to be hysterical, and I'm sure he regrets it later, not to say that it necessarily would have changed the outcome, but how much of that do you think actually factored in?
Well, it's actually funny because I haven't really been on TV that many times, but I've been on TV twice with someone who was like heavily drinking, Phil Locke.
Right.
It's just
Although,
really
let me ask you this real quick. Sorry to interrupt you. The Phil Locke thing, before we get back to the WPT.
Sure.
I was talking with a buddy on Instant Messenger, and we were both saying, Phil's a smart guy. I think he's way smarter than anyone that he tries to portray. Is there any chance he was faking like he was drunk? He was not drinking vodka? Pineapple?
No.
I think that's what his drink.
No, I don't think so. And the main reason I say that is because I wasn't sure at first. And then, Poker After Dark is 2 weeks, right? And it's all filmed in one day. So in between the 2 weeks, when they have the redraw, there's a dinner break. So you break for an hour. There's no cameras, there's nothing. So when we were eating during dinner break, he was like, I had like my fiance was there and my manager was there. So it was like the three of us, and I'm like down a lot of money. So I'm like kind of bummed, and like I'm trying to think about the next half and trying to play well and what my strategies are going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And he comes up to us while we're eating, and he's acting the same way. I mean, he's just still out of his mind, and you can just tell this is not a show. He's not doing this for the camera. This is the deal right now. And I didn't really begrudge him for it. People have had very kind of strong reactions to that. For me, I was more concerned with what I was doing, how I was playing. Like Biffer, for example, he seemed to get pretty ticked off at Phil. Which I just think, that for me, that type of reaction just takes away from yourself. Whenever you kind of get upset about something external to what you're trying to focus on, you are, kind of essentially losing bandwidth, right? I mean, you have to really focus on what you're doing completely to give yourself the best chance. So for me, and the same thing was true against Jeremy Brown, the WPT. When he was doing that, the thing with Jeremy was I think that was more of a show than Phil Locke was for a couple reasons. One, Jeremy's attitude was similar at the final table than it was throughout the tournament, where he wasn't drinking at all. he had this abrasive kind of like, you know, I'm going to call you out and then you're going to make a mistake against me type of vibe going. And it actually had worked for him in different situations. So I think the actual drinking thing, you know, he's a really big guy too. I don't know if people realize when Jeremy Brown gets up, he's like 6'4", 6'5", like 240 pounds. So it takes a lot of, and he's like not that many years out of college where I'm sure he's been drinking a lot. So I think it takes a lot for that guy to really get hammered. That being said, I still think he was drinking too much. And there was a time, I think you actually see it in WBT, where he goes, can I get some water over here? You know, he like starts to shift. But I think, you know, for me, I think, first of all, he did that a little bit as kind of a reaction to dealing with pressure. You know, people, you know, this was the first WPT or first big final table, not just for him, but for any of us. And I think everybody deals with pressure and stress in different ways. And I think he had all his boys there, you know, they were like a raucous crowd. And, you know, they were really like that. There was like 15 of them. They're all his boys. He's trying to kind of show for them. And like, you know, like if he can win in front of them, it's going to be like just like insane, and they're going to party and like rock out, right? So, I mean, I think he was playing into that a little bit. And then it also was reinforced by the fact that it worked in certain situations. So even at the final table, he said something to one of the other players when they were like blind versus blind, and the other player like made a mistake and just opened jams for not that many blinds, but still too many blinds with like 10-4 or something ridiculous. And Jeremy had eights or something like that, a pair, and already seen his hand like snap called and knocked the guy out. So when that works for you a little bit, it starts to, you know, build on itself. Now, I didn't think it was going to work against me, you know, because I wasn't
Right.
going to, you know, change my play or try to focus on that as much. But, you know, when Jeremy and I started playing heads up, it wasn't 20-1, right? He had like a 3-1 lead, or it wasn't that big of a lead. And then he was just playing really, really aggressively, and I don't know if I made some bad plays or it just happens like that. He built that lead from 3-1 to 20-1 heads up, and then lost it after that. So, you know, if he doesn't build that lead first and then lose it, it's not really that great of a comeback. But it's because I had to go down first against him to get all the way down low to then come back that it's like, wow, he was down 20-1. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Now, I guess we should, I mean, there's a whole thread where people are posting your conversation you had a few days ago, or maybe a couple weeks ago, with Scott Palmer. And I guess you guys played You're Not in Danger too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I guess you're talking about you're playing, you know, heads up, sit and goes, and he's a
I mean,
plays the high
I can break
stakes
down
cash
that conversation very simply if you want.
I have it here, but go ahead. Yeah, I want to hear what you have to say.
Basically, I've known who he was, like his online name, because he's one of the best heads up cash game players, and I always, you know, thought he was a very good player. I still do, but he came into he started playing me. He played me a couple times on PokerStars. And whenever these cash game players come and play me, I am always curious kind of what they are trying to do. So a lot of times I ask them, I'm like, do you want to like, you know, play for real, or are you just kind of gambling for, you know, playing a couple games for fun, right? Because like, you know, people talk about hit and running in cash games, like it's this really kind of thing you shouldn't do, right? But hit and running does exist a little bit in heads up sit and go. So some people argue that it doesn't because like each game ends and you can play as many games as you want. But you know, each hand ends in a cash game and you can play as many hands as you want. So I ask people, not everybody, but people that I know are serious poker players, if they are planning on playing me for a while or not. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so at the, you know, so on Stars, I asked him if he was to play for a while, and he said no. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's just play a few games if you want and whatever. I was like, but if you want, I'll give you your rake back. If you want to play me a long session, I'll try to incentivize you to play me by giving you your rake back. And he was like, okay, maybe, but I gotta go now, so I'll just play a couple games and then go. Fine, no problem. So then,
hold on, can you explain that? Explain that strategy. Like, why make that offer?
Because I don't think people will play me without the offer, basically. So I'm trying to get them to play me, and I think my edge over them is large enough that I can give away rake. So in a 5K it would be $100 a game. So if I can play him with, let's say, a 3 or 4% ROI, beat him for $250 a game, I can pay that $100 and make $150 a game. Whereas,
Gotcha.
and for me, that's important because in 5Ks, I've sat 5Ks like, I don't know, I've maybe taken 20 days off from poker this year. So without that, I've sat 6 or 8 hours a day, every day, besides the 20 days I've taken off this entire year. And I've played 125Ks. You know what I mean? It's hard for me to get games. So,
Right.
and actually, out of the 120, I played like 40 or 50 of them against someone that I paid rake against. So
Was that
without paying
Tom?
rake, maybe I would have only played 60 or 70 of them. And I ended up beating that guy by a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that much because it's a small sample, but still. If I think I have an edge over someone, I'm willing to do that. Now, he's a really good player, so I'm not sure if I have as big of an edge against him. But since he has, from what I expected, not very much heads-up sit-and-go experience, I figured I would have a pretty big edge against him, at least in the beginning. So he sits me on full tilt, and I ask him a similar type of question. And he didn't really respond with a yes or no. And then I was like, well, do you think you were going to beat me over the long term, or are you just playing for fun? And he instantly responded with like a very kind of arrogant, like, yeah, of course I can beat you. You play sit and goes type of response.
Right.
This is the type of response I've gotten from cash game players since I started playing sit and goes. This type of, there's no possible way you can know anything about poker because you play sit and goes. Right? I play cash games, which is real poker, and you play the play money fake version of what I'm doing.
Right.
Basically. And it's this really kind of condescending, just arrogant kind of point of view. And I am very, very now by this time used to that. And so I said to him, do you realize that I'm the same player that you played on Stars? Because I assumed that he did. I don't know why I assumed that, but I think most people knew what my both names were. But I guess he really pays no attention at all to these games, and so he was like, no, I have no idea, He didn't realize, and he didn't know who I was any different from any other sit-and-go player. Right. Fine, okay, no problem. So I'm happy to continue playing. But I wasn't really enthused about the just overly arrogant kind of, you can't possibly understand poker since you're a sit-and-go player. And I've been known at times to kind of call people out when I think that they say things that I don't really appreciate. And so I got into it a little bit with him, which I probably didn't need to, but I did. And that conversation ensued from that.
How did those matches go? Because just from doing research,
he crushed me.
He beat. Yeah, he did. Just variance? Is he better than you gave him credit for? Did you not adjust?
He's exactly
properly?
what I expected him to be. And we played 6 games. So what cash game players for me tend to fall into a couple different categories. Some of them, like for example, Isildur, for example, right? When I play Isildur on Stars, Isildur hates to call, right? That's one thing I noticed about him. He hates to call. So he plays too conservative out of position, and he plays too, I don't want to say conservative, but too polarized against 3-bets. So when I started 3-betting Isildur a lot, he would never call my 3-bets, right? But then he started jamming a lot. So at 75 and at 50 blinds, you can really exploit someone's range if all they're doing is folding and jamming against your 3-bets. So there are cash game players who respond like that. There are cash game players who are like, call every single 3-bet. They're just like, if they flop a pair, a draw, a gutter, anything, they're just going to get it in. It's like they respond by the shorter nature of sit and goes to kind of have dramatically wide ranges. They just jam any ace or something like that. And basically all cash game players are pretty bad, let's say under 15 blinds. And again, they're bad in 2 different ways. They either jam every hand or they wait to have ace 8 or better. That's basically their response. And so I expected him to do that. And one of the things he did was he started to limp. Basically, from my point of view, he's limping because he's a cash game player. So his massive edge is post-flop, and limping will create more post-flop opportunities in position. Now, I don't know a single heads-up sit-and-go player who, above the 550 level, who's profitable and limps consistently. There might be 1 or 2, and they're like from 3 or 4 years ago who has still managed to win. But basically nobody does that. And so right away I knew that there's going to be possible to create edges against him because he was limping. And he just wasn't going to be winning enough pots pre-flop. And And so, I mean, basically what happened was he just won a lot of the all-ins. We played 6 games. I think I won 1, and then he won 5 in a row or something like that. And that's what happens in 6 games, 6 heads-up sit-and-goes. Especially against someone who, again, it's not like I thought at any point that he was not good. He's still good. He's good at poker. He understands poker. But those small differences can create 3, 4, 5% edge, and that's a lot of money at 5Ks. So if somebody's winning a decent number of the all-ins, they're going to win. That's just how it goes. So, but the part that I thought was so funny, or not funny, but ironic, I guess, was that after all of this trash talk, he plays 6 games and then quits and doesn't come back. You know, because if somebody's going to beat me over the long term in 5Ks, there's a lot of money to win. I'm not really going to quit someone for a long, long time. And if someone, you know, from my point of view, he probably doesn't get that much action at cash games. So while you're waiting for cash games, if you can make some money beating me in 5Ks, why not? So I just, you know, I was just kind of didn't really appreciate the condescending nature that I've experienced multiple times from cash game players, that basically if you don't play high-stakes cash games, you can't possibly be good at poker.
So can we have some sort of a Olivier challenge then to all the cash game guys out there? I mean, let's get it going. Come on, let's get you some action.
Well, I actually made a challenge where I said I would pay anybody in their rake to play 2Ks. I think it was like 100 games or something like that. And a couple people responded, like the people you would expect, like the very good high-stakes cash game players. But they all wanted to multi-table, and they all wanted to play 5Ks. And I didn't really want to do it for 5Ks because this was a couple years ago, and I wasn't as comfortable with 5K variants. And I don't multi-table. Like, I have no doubt that cash game players in particular will be able to neutralize or even create their own edge playing 4 tables. I have no doubt about that, and no qualms. You know, from an egotistical point of view, I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm not very good at multi-tabling, and that if I multi-table against someone, I will, you know, a lot of my edge will decrease. Do
you simply play 1 table at a time then? For the most part?
Most of the time. Now, with Super Turbos, it's a little bit different, because with Super Turbos, I can start to incorporate more tables. But with regular heads-up sit-and-goes, I can play more tables, and it's, you know, obviously easier to do it against the same person, but I'm just not as good at it. I have much, much less experience than basically everybody else, and I just don't feel as comfortable. I think for me, you know, when I was talking about before of like game dynamics, like I lose my feel for what's going on. When I'm playing multiple tables, when my focus is diverted. And I think people underestimate a little bit the shifts in people's ranges from, you know, at small changes, small moments in games. I think you have someone people tend to play just a little bit tighter, a little bit more aggressive. They're just a little bit less willing to bluff or call a bluff, depending on different things that have happened in the game, the way the sequence of games has occurred. And so my ability to take advantage or to just recognize, because now I've played over 50,000 of these games, to recognize those spots is taken away as I'm diverting attention to multiple tables.
How much of that, though, is the fact that you are relatively new to HUDs? I mean, you've only been using HUDs for 4 months now, right? You said you started in December 2010? So, so I mean, maybe this will be something, though, that you will incorporate more in the future. Who knows?
I totally agree with you. HUD makes it much easier to multi-table. That's just a totally fair and good point, yeah.
Well, it's just a fact, yeah.
What about, I just didn't really think about it, but yeah.
Yeah. What about your work with Durr? I find that fascinating. That was this before I don't know, some of his Durr, was it, when the hell was that he consult with you and you worked with him? I read about that.
Well, you played a bunch of matches against him, right? Because he was trying to prepare for a 25K heads-up event.
I actually think this was something that was played up very much in terms of whoever heard the story or decided to write about this story.
Okay, good.
Nothing really happened at all between me and Tom, at all. There was, like you're saying, a 25K heads up, and it was one of the first ones, if not the first one. And Tom sat a few 5Ks for like a few hours one day to, I guess, prepare to, like, you know, get a sense for 50 blinds and below, is my guess. We played, I don't even know how many games, 10 or 15 games. I think I did pretty well. I don't even really remember. It was, you know, it's 15 games. I played one day.
Right.
Sure, it was Durr, so it was something I remember a little bit more. But we didn't talk at all. and there was really no interaction basically at all besides that.
Who are some of the other sort of the legends? You've mentioned some of the biggest names in poker right now. Did you have experience against and some opinions on? You've mentioned Durr. You've mentioned Isildur. Have you played Jungle Man?
I think you played Daniel, right?
Negreanu?
Yeah.
No, Daniel was playing heads-up sit and goes for like 3 weeks on PokerStars at the beginning of the year, and I actually wasn't playing on Stars at the time, so I've actually never played Daniel. Jungle Man, I have played. He did take like a 1-day stint at heads-up sit and goes. We weren't even playing high stakes. We were playing like 1Ks or 2Ks. I think he was just playing them just for fun. And then I also had dinner with him once in Vegas with him and a few other people. My opinion about him is basically just respect. I really just have a lot of respect for him. I think he's an incredibly thoughtful and smart player, very analytical. He picked up incredibly quickly on a lot of kind of things that normally takes people a while to pick up on in heads-up sit and goes. And he was a really nice guy when I had dinner with him. And I was just, it was the kind of guy that for me was just easy to root for as he kind of soared in the high stakes and in the poker, the kind of poker consciousness. So yeah, my opinion of him is basically that. In terms of other people, I remember playing Brian Townsend when he was still SB Rugby, when he was still coming up, and he would just like kind of consistently just outplay me when I was playing 25-50. And I just remember basically thinking, there's a lot of room between where I'm at and where I could be at from a theoretical point of view. I just remember playing with him and just thinking he's doing things and thinking about things that I'm not. I can just tell by the way he plays. I don't know exactly why he's doing what he's doing, but I should probably try to figure it out.
Now, any desire to be, Jungle Man or Tom Dwan, just sort of transition to the really high stakes nosebleed games?
No, not really. I mean, for me, another thing that I speak to some of these younger players that kind of that I interact with on a daily basis is about kind of their egos in poker, and how I think so many young players are dominated by their egos. Whether it's tilting because of a blow to their ego, or just not using good bankroll management or good game selection because people tell me they want to be the best or they want to beat the best. And look, if that's your goal in poker, great. You're perfectly entitled to have that goal. But that's not a goal that's going to mesh very well with maximizing your poker profit potential. And so my goals in poker are to make as much money as I can. Another thing I was thinking about with cash games is another reason that I don't play cash games or try to move up and play super high stakes cash games is because though that the really good cash game players can make a lot of money, they also take an enormous amount of risk, right? I mean, you play 200, 400, 300, 600, you can be up, you can make $1 million in a week or in a month or something like that, but you can just as easily lose $1 million. And you see that. You see guys go on these massive swings and these massive downswings, and that doesn't really apply to me in what I do. I grind out 300, 400K in heads-up sit and go profit. That money's not going anywhere. I might go on a 30K downswing, a 50K downswing, but I don't really go on bigger downswings than that. It's very, very rare. So that money is locked up for me, and that gives me a peace of mind as well. So from it's not just the reward point of view of the money, the potential money, but it's also the risk point of view of how big a downswing I could go on if I was playing really high stakes. My poker goals now are basically to try to draw some attention to some of the things that I've been talking about here in this interview, some of the things that people don't talk about as much in their poker experiences, how to address those issues for people so that they don't feel like they're dealing with them totally by themselves. And then to just kind of increase my exposure, and I have a bunch of different ideas for different things in poker. I've just approached Full Tilt now with, it's funny that you mentioned challenge. I have a challenge of my own, but it has a different twist to it. It's not let's see how good you are if you can beat me type of challenge. It's more of there's going to be a competition, and then the winner will become someone that I mentor. rather than someone that has to try
awesome.
to beat me. Yeah, so that's more along the lines that I want to go, rather than some of the directions some of the other people have gone.
I might want to enter that contest. Now, as far as a site deal goes, do you have one? Are you hoping to get one? Are you one of those guys who says it's no thanks?
No, I'm not one of those guys. I don't have a deal. I'm trying to basically get the best deal that I can. I'm not trying to just get the first available deal. I'm not Tom Dwan, so I'm not going to become, a member of Team Full Tilt. But there is still a range of deals that are available, and so I want to try to get the best deal for me. So this challenge that I'm talking about, I'm actually hoping can lead to maybe partnering up with a website. So we'll see. I have a couple things in the work. I have some other ideas too that might branch off of this idea, or et cetera. So we'll see. I have different things that I'm hoping will become popular and that might catch on. And if they do, then hopefully I'll be around more.
Awesome. Well, I guess people need to check you out. Your website, olivierbusquet.com.
Yeah.
Correct, which you update pretty often. Twitter @Olivier Busquet.
Right.
Which I follow you, so I suggest everyone does the same.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We're gonna see you out at the World Series.
Yeah, I'm playing the NAPT Mohegan. Then I'm going to Italy with my fiance. We're playing San Remo and then Madrid, and then I think I have time after Madrid to play the WPT Championship, and then the World Series. So the last few years, I've spent like 5 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row in Vegas at the World Series. And I don't, kind of living in a hotel. I never wanted to get a house because I thought that I would get really distracted from the poker. But I never really loved the isolated experience of living in a hotel by myself in Vegas for 4 weeks. So I'm thinking of kind of breaking it up into 2 or 3 trips and going out, playing a few events, and then coming home. That's my goal. But yeah, I'm going to play a bunch of. I didn't play the big World Series events last year, like there was a 25K 6-max, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
If that event, I haven't even looked at the schedule, but I'm going to look at the schedule and definitely play the bigger no limit events if they're around.
Very nice.
Cool. Well, listen, without trying to sound too gay, you're one of my idols. I don't know how else to say it without sounding like a cheesy, guy. But so thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. And it's, we enjoy watching you play, and good luck with everything you have going.
Thank you. I appreciate what you said, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Now Bret,
awesome.
you've kept your pants on the whole show, right? I can't see below your waist.
I have.
Yeah. Okay.
I
good.
have. Yes,
Good.
I have.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Olivier. Really appreciate
Thanks, Olivier.
it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Take care.